Hello, and welcome to Required Reading, the podcast that revisits the most impactful books from our childhood. I'm your host, Erin Bowles. I am a writer, actor, and comedian. If you would like to support the show, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/requiredreading. Our guest today is back from our Princess Bride episode. Madeline North is here. She is a photographer and marketer based in LA, working with small businesses and digital marketing for authors. Her free time is spent working on her novel, an adventure with her dog, or curling up with her cat and a good book. You can find her at That Bookish Witch or at That Bookish Coven on all platforms. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, I'm so good. Our book today. This episode has taken a little while to schedule because it is such a thickie. It's from 2002, Eragon by Christopher Paolini. What is your story with this book?
This was like my fantasy book. Like, I'm such a big fantasy person. We talked about this before. The Princess Bride was probably the first fantasy fairy tale-esque story that I was like super like obsessed with. But that was from like a really young age. And it wasn't until later that I went back and read the book. But the Aragon, I think, aside from maybe like Harry Potter and like some more like even younger like middle grade and like chapter books, I think Eragon was the first like you could consider high fantasy novel that I read that really like got me really super obsessed with the genre. And then I know it's controversial, but I loved the movie when it came out in
Yeah.
2006. I would just play it on repeat. It was probably literally like just a cycle of Aragon and the Princess Bride. Knowing me, that's probably what was Buffy on in the background, just cycling through all of them. But yeah, I think that this is like the start of my love for like really deep high fantasy. I think we talked a little bit last time on the difference between like high fantasy and like fairy tales.
Exactly, yeah.
Consider The Princess Bride to be like my core like fairy tale story, and the Aragon is like my core like high fantasy.
And I love that distinction because I think had we not talked about it, that never would have occurred to me, that distinction, and yet they do really stand alone.
Yeah.
So, Eragon 2002 is about a boy named Eragon who discovers a dragon egg, and all hell breaks loose for this 15-year-old boy. Christopher Paolini started writing this when he finished high school at age 15. It was published at age 19 through his parents' publishing company. It was mildly successful, and then Carl Hyacin, who's a children's author and adult author, his stepson found it in a bookstore and fell in love with it, and they got Knopf to buy the rest of the series and turn it into a movie. And Christopher Paolini became, I mean, this was from the 2011 Guinness Book of World Records, but was the youngest New York best-selling author ever.
That's incredible.
Absolutely wild. So, what do you think was it about this particular one? Had you like, was this just the first fantasy that you had like stumbled upon, or what do you think was it that made you kept coming back to it? How did you like get through it? What made, because looking at this, I think that would have really discouraged me immediately.
Because of the size?
Yeah, and I also just like I definitely have patience issues. So what do you think about like this specific one that engaged you and kept coming back to it?
That's an interesting question. It is interesting that you said that it was his parents' publishing house. I didn't realize that. I just knew that it was like self-published, which in 2002, self-published, I was like, how do you like
Yeah.
as a 16-year-old, how do you even do that? That's crazy. But he was homeschooled, which I think is interesting. I was also homeschooled. So like
Mm.
my dad is an English teacher. So he was like my English teacher, and he gave me like all of the heavy hitting classics from a very young age, but he's also like a sci-fi buff. So like rather than getting like, I mean, obviously I got Harry Potter because that was the big thing at the time, and but he's not like into fantasy at all. So like I had
Oh.
kind of like gotten like I guess sort of a magical element from Harry Potter and from like younger chapter books. But I think it was the cover that I found, because the cover I love the cover. I think it's stunning. And I've always been like fascinated with dragons. I had the Dragonology books from a very young age. I still have them on my shelf behind me. And I think it just really opened up the possibilities of like a science, like not science fiction, but like of a fantasy world in a way that I hadn't seen before. Because, you know, Harry Potter is very like, I would consider that low fantasy. And then I
Yeah.
really was into, because my dad didn't like them, so I didn't like have, not that I couldn't, but it just wasn't like
Mhm.
something that I was really even aware of. The
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings books and like even like traditional older high fantasy. And I genuinely don't know how I stumbled upon it, but I remember like seeing the dragon and being like,
Mhm.
hold on, let me just see what this is. And yeah, I think probably because my dad is a writer and an English teacher, that was like the size and the thickness wasn't really anything that I
Right.
ever been like deterred from. It was
That's true.
I probably saw it as a challenge, like this
Mm.
giant book in front of like tiny me, but I genuinely don't remember how I stumbled upon it, but I know that it was just the fact that it was dragons and it was something that I hadn't really in different ways like had access to this kind of storytelling.
Why, and this is a big question generally. Why do you think dragons enchant you or us, all of us? What's up? Why dragons?
I'm obsessed with dragons. I am so obsessed with dragons. I have dragon tattoos. I literally have a two-headed dragon plushie
Right next to you.
right next to me. I think it's just something fantastical that is much larger than us. Like you
Yeah.
can think of fantastical creatures that are more what's the word?
Anthropomorphized?
Yes, anthropomorphic, I guess. Like
Yeah.
humanoid, like you can think of like you can empathize with elves and dwarves and like humanoid creatures in a different way. But to see a creature, and I think that this is something that comes up in most dragon books, to
Mhm.
see a creature that is so large and so powerful and is generally looked at as just like a beast, like a
Mhm.
vicious beast, but almost every single time they have the most profound intelligence and they're almost like gods.
Mhm.
Like, I don't know if it's technically a dragon, but if you see Neverending Story,
I
like,
haven't, not yet.
you have not seen Neverending
I
Story.
haven't.
Oh my gosh.
Incredible, right?
Maybe we need to do another episode on that.
Hell yeah, brother.
There's like a dog dragon
Yeah.
creature, and he's like essentially like he's this godlike creature, but the connection that they have with humanity is always
Mhm.
very deep and very special. I also love the idea, I don't know if you've heard like the theory that like almost every single
Yeah.
community, I don't know, like
Or like cultural mythology.
yes, every single
Yes.
like mythology has some form of a myth about dragons, and you can like use logic and you can be like, oh well, they found dinosaur bones and they just came up with the,
Mhm.
but what if
Right.
it's something that like if you just like stretch your imagination a little bit, maybe there were dragons a millennia
Yeah.
ago,
I
yeah.
love that. And I especially love thinking about it in the perspective of it's entwined with, this is a children's young adult novel, of this literally larger than life, gigantic, extreme powerful thing paired with a little kid and
Yeah,
feeling the most vulnerable, the least powerful, the smallest.
yeah,
And something I particularly loved about this, and I think this is in most dragon narratives, is this bond between a dragon and the writer or a human or like you were saying, humanity. And I think something that Eragon and his dragon Saphira shares that they're like telepathic, they can always communicate with each other, and I think that in reading this was so appealing to me and would
mhm,
have been so appealing then of like a constant companion
yeah,
because I felt so alone throughout my childhood. So I think that is reading it, I was like, that would have been so incredible and so special.
yeah.
That is such a draw,
There's
definitely.
also something about like it, like I said, it being such like a godlike creature.
Mm-hmm.
Saphira is, one of the last of her kind at this point, and essentially prophesies to save the world.
Yes, yes.
Right? I think at one point he says, I'm just a simple farm boy.
Yeah.
It's definitely like the chosen one narrative. You don't feel
Mhm.
worthy, whatever, but then growing into your power. But I think the fact that, especially in Eragon, like Saphira waited years and years. I don't remember exactly
Yeah.
how long it was, but there was a passage where it was saying like a dragon is ready to hatch the moment the egg is laid and they wait
Mhm.
for their rider. And I think there's something like really powerful, like you're saying, about being very young and seeing yourself in any way in a story like that, and to think that you could be chosen by this like godlike creature can see something special in you, even if you're just
Yeah.
a simple farm boy.
I really like thinking of it like that because I think there are a lot of chosen one narratives. Obviously, Harry Potter was huge when we were growing up, but I think often with Harry Potter, with Hunger Games, those chosen one narratives sort of feel like an accident. And the beautiful thing with this one is that, yes, Saphira waits and chooses. And I think that is one of the really special elements of this.
Yeah,
And even though, and Saphira says at least once, like, even though, like, in terms of, days since I've hatched, I am younger than you, she
yeah,
is connected to this ancient intelligence. And I think that is also probably very enticing and comforting to the very, very young.
yeah.
How do you feel in general about sort of chosen one narratives? Because those feel so gigantic cultural presence.
Yeah. It's funny. I have very complicated feelings. I think I have a love-hate relationship with them. The book that I'm working on actually is like, I like to say that it's an anti-chosen one,
Ooh,
because I think it's like you said, like they usually feel like an accident. That's a really good way to put it. It's
not
like, what
chosen. Yeah.
is this prophecy, and you just kind of happen to fit the shoe. The book that I'm working on actually is like, well, what if the prophecy was just wrong? Who's to say that this is actually a real thing that we're all hinging our survival on, right? But yeah, it's always fascinating because it feels important, especially for a young audience, to find the potential to find a larger meaning
Yeah.
in their life, in the world, in the things that they do, and what they could become. But it also feels a little, I don't know, like I always feel like, well, what about everyone else?
Yeah.
Okay, the chosen one, but what about like all of his sidekicks that maybe worked harder than him because he's the one that was given magic because of whatever prophecy, but like they were alongside him the entire time with no magic or without all
Mhm.
of these different things helping them. I very much root for the underdog, so maybe that's just
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
I don't know. I have complicated feelings about the chosen one narrative, but I like the way that it's done in
Mhm.
Aragon because yeah, like you said, it's feels less like chance and more like it feels more intentional.
Yeah. That question of how did the sidekicks feel, I think is so interesting. And I think that is something that like I think the later Harry Potter books did a good job with of exploring sort of what that is. And I think that was something that really with that and with Hunger Games of playing out like what if it had been someone else? Like in Harry Potter it was almost Neville, poor sweet little Neville who I really loved. And like Hermione definitely worked harder. She worked her ass
Exactly.
off. Yeah, so I think that's really interesting. Although I think there are very few. What's interesting about this book is there's a lot of side characters, but none feel very
Yeah.
important.
Well, they're important in the
Mhm.
sense that they are like I think they're important to the plot, but they're not
Yes.
necessarily important to Aragon or Saphira.
Mhm.
Like Brom dies pretty quickly, but if
Yes.
he hadn't been there, Aragon, well, he probably would have been dead, but like he wouldn't have
Mhm.
been able to get to where he needed to go. Murtagh is there, and I know that Murtagh gets a book later on
Yes,
in the
like
series.
2 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, very recently. I haven't read it yet. So like he has his own story and backstory, and I'm really interested to see like what happens with that, but it's not necessarily relevant for any longer than it needs to be. It's interesting. His only real connections are with Saphira
Mhm.
and Arya, like eventually. But really
Yeah.
Arya is just kind of in his head, like for most
Exactly.
of the book. So they don't really like he has a lot of internal character growth, but he
Mhm.
doesn't have Oh, it's very sad. He doesn't really have relationships with
Yeah.
anyone substantial, which knowing his past, like he lost his parents. He
Mhm.
right away in the beginning of the book, he loses his uncle who raised him. He loses his cousin. Like all he has is Saphira, which at least she is this like higher being, I guess. But it's interesting. He doesn't, at least in this book, he doesn't really have like a sidekick. Like
Yeah, which feels like a pretty, and you are much more versed in fantasy than I am, but that feels like a pretty traditional element of gathering the team,
yeah.
of you're tramping through the forest
Yeah.
with Sam and Pippin and Mary.
Yeah, I wonder actually, and I hadn't thought of it until just now, but like I wonder because like I said, I was homeschooled.
Oh,
I
yeah.
wonder if that is like part of why this resonated more with me. Like I didn't have friends my age really. Like I was always seated at the grown-ups table. You know, I could be
Mm,
friends with my parents' friends and whatever, and like I was very much able to like be with the adults from a very young age, which is where like Aragon is like thrown into this. He doesn't like even Arya, like once their relationship starts to form, she's still hundreds of years old. He's
yes.
an elf. Like and again, most chosen ones are forced to grow up very
Hmm.
quickly. But he doesn't have that. Like I don't want to call it a crutch, but sometimes the side characters are definitely
Yeah.
as a crutch. And it is interesting that he's not given that. And I wonder, I'm sure that relates a lot to the fact that Paolini was also homeschooled and probably also lonely and
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it like that.
that's
That's really insightful. We talked a little bit about the movie, which only came out 4 years after the first book.
yeah.
This is
This means
a
he's 23 when the movie based on
23.
his book came out. Isn't that insane?
No.
That's insane.
But you said you're a fan of it. You said you like it a lot.
Okay, I did.
Oh no.
No, 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 no. I mean, okay, it's a very controversial film. Like
Hmm.
every time I see anything about the movie, it's people like hating on it.
Yeah.
I did skim through it this morning in the very early hours because I really was curious. I haven't reread Eragon in probably a decade.
Right.
I do plan on like now that we have gotten through the first book, I do plan on continuing the series because that was my plan when Murtagh came out is I was like, okay,
Mhm.
I don't want to read Murtagh until I go back and reread the series. But since I finished Aragon literally last night, I was like, hold on, like I just need to see how bad it really was because I haven't watched it in probably a decade. I just need to know if I was really that delusional or or if people were just like unnecessarily harsh.
Mhm.
I think that it's a combination. To be fair,
Okay. Okay.
because it is only an hour and 20 minutes.
Oh.
It's very short. It's one of the few movies. Usually, I'm like, okay, you could have cut out at least a half hour. I think this needed to be added at
Mhm.
least another half hour,
Especially for
especially for
such
how
a long book.
book.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's 500 pages. It's as far as like, I guess, adult fantasy, like that's pretty typical,
Yeah.
but this is a YA fantasy. And this is also like not just YA fantasy, which is typically
It's like,
aged like 12 to 18.
mhm.
This is like on the younger spectrum of that.
Yeah.
Like it's rated as like 10 to 15 rather than
Mhm.
12 to 18. So it is interesting with how chunky it is, but I don't hate the animation or like the CGI.
Right.
That's a pain point for a lot of people when I was like going through like the forums and stuff. Some people hate it. I personally don't hate it. I don't hate the voice of Saphira, the voice actress, which side note, I mostly listen to the audiobook of this.
Yeah.
And I just have to say that it's narrated by a man, obviously, but the voice he does for Saphira sounds like Yoda.
Oh no.
Sounds like Yoda. Like verbatim. The only difference is that the words are not swapped backwards. Like that's it. It
Damn.
very much sounds like Yoda. So I did switch back to the physical book. So comparing that, I like the voice of Saphira, and
Incredible. Yes. Huge upsell.
the cast is amazing. Have you seen the film?
No, let me look up the cast right now.
The cast is insane, in my opinion. I mean, Jeremy Irons, I love him. I think
Mm.
he's perfect. He plays Brom. Um,
Aw.
and his voice and like the presence that he brings as
Wow.
like
John Malkovich, Robert Carlyle, Rachel
John
Weisz.
Malkovich is like the evil king. Robert Kyle is perfect. Like seeing him, like he started, I feel like this was what he took and then like Frankensteined into his character in Once Upon a Time.
Oh, very interesting. And he
But
plays
his
so
mannerisms are the same. He plays the
mm,
shade. Durza is the shade who
right.
captured Arya and then is chasing them.
He's sort of
Right.
more like minor antagonist that is like
Yeah,
a
yeah.
representation
And
of the larger.
in the film, he's much larger,
Mhm.
is like given a bigger persona. And I do like that because in the book, when I was reading it, I was like, I thought he was like a bigger,
Yeah.
like more important, like more powerful. He's essentially like the king's right hand man. Like he
Right.
does all of his bidding for him. And then John Malkovich is kind of in the background, just like
On the throne. Yeah.
with a very, like, very bad beard.
Oh.
But yeah, I mean, I think the casting honestly was perfect. I even think like there's a lot of other people too, like the woman who plays Michonne in The Walking Dead. Love her. She's there at
Oh.
the end. It's like a little cheesy, but my biggest thing is like the pacing is just really bad because they shoved 500 pages
Yeah.
to an hour and 20 minutes. But I think if they had like made it, God forbid, 3 hours, but I think
Mhm.
it could have been really good.
Yeah. Well, and I think I saw in my research as of 2022, he was writing a live action show for Disney, which feels like what this ought to be in terms
Yeah,
of
it
format.
definitely feels like it should be like a Rings of Power-esque
Mhm.
TV show where you get like I would love to see more of the elves and more of like Eragon is the main character, but he's
Mhm.
also supported so heavily by all of
Yes.
the B plot lines
Mhm.
that I think a television show would really do this justice. I
Yeah.
haven't been able to find any recent news
Mhm.
on that since
Right.
2 years. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's not happening, but
Right.
yeah.
And it is very
Very
episodic. It is like very clearly he moves through. I think something that like when I was starting the book, I was very frustrated because like he creates an intense geography about
Mhm.
this place. There's so many place names. There's so many. I think you know I'm an editor's daughter, so I have a pretty big red pen throughout anything I read. But he creates this really dense world, and they travel throughout it. So there's the part where he's in the city, and there's this huge sequence throughout the last like quarter of the book where he's underground with the dwarves and all of these things. So it just begs to be a TV show. It feels so natural for it to be that. But also like 2006, that's not what we were doing in terms of the cultural landscape at the time.
Because
Yeah.
the TV shows that we wanted in 2006, we wanted like the Vampire Diaries. Like we
Yes.
wanted, it needed more romance. It needed
Mm-hmm.
probably romance heavy. And
Mm-hmm.
while there is, I guess, a little bit of romance in this, it's not the focus at all. And I don't think that I think audiences would have disliked it even more.
Yeah. Definitely. And I think I appreciate, and I think there's definitely something gendered in it. And, you know, books about young girls, there's a lot more romance in it. But I appreciate in this, it has this sort of attitude that feels kind of related to the Hunger Games of like, I don't have time to be flirting, which I really appreciate.
Like the world is ending.
Yes.
Priorities, guys.
And I think there's even a moment or two where Aragon is like, I don't have time to have she's pretty, but like I'm busy.
She's an elf. Like, what am I doing?
She's so old.
He's also a baby. He is 15. He turns 16 on like in like
Yeah.
the third act, I think. They do age him up quite a bit in
Mm-hmm.
the movie. I think he's 17, turns 18 in the movie, which I think is just necessary overall, especially because of the romance that they introduce at the
Mm-hmm.
end. The potential, like if you put mid-20s
Yes.
actress with like a 15-year-old child, that's gonna be an issue.
And
But
the romance is with Arya, this elf that he saves. Oh, okay, because there's a very minor character that is this king's daughter, and that's what I expected was
I'm
there to be a romance with them.
Arya.
Okay, cool.
I'm pretty sure that's where it goes. I'll let you know when I read the book.
Thank you.
Because also, like, in the movie, I don't think the king's daughter is a character.
That makes sense. She's barely in this
Yeah.
one. That makes total
So
sense.
that's, I think, why I'm like, I don't think so. He could be like introducing a love triangle. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Again, he was 15 when he wrote this.
Yeah.
Like, that's crazy. I don't know how much he like actually intentionally put in here.
Yeah. If I remember his 16th birthday, it's very Gatsby. It's very like, oh, actually today's my birthday. I didn't
Yeah,
realize that, which is so
yeah. It's
tragic.
very, again, it's, yeah, very tragic. Tragic is the right word. This poor child.
Baby.
And I think it makes
Yeah.
it all the more tragic because he doesn't have that support
Mm-hmm.
system. Like in Harry Potter, I think it's the first one where it's like, oh yeah, it is Christmas, but then the like Ron is still there
Mm-hmm.
to be like, hey, it's Christmas, like we're alone, but like let's celebrate together. And then in the later movies and books, they're on the run and they're like all alone from their family. I think it's someone's birthday or maybe it is Christmas
Mm-hmm.
again or something, and it's like, yeah, this is really sad and we're alone and we're like dealing with these really hard times, but we're together and we have each other, and so let's make the most of it. And Eragon is like got this millennia old dragon and an old, I think he's with Murtagh at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I read Murtagh as like much older than,
Oh, I read him as like just a year or two older. Murtaugh is this.
yeah.
How would you describe him as a character? Because his lore is a bit lost on me.
He is, I believe he's like the son of like I don't, it's a little muddled. He's a son of like one of the bad guys, not like
Yeah.
the son of the king, but he's the son of, and I believe his father's dead. He's the
Mm-hmm.
son of the, like maybe it's one of the generals or something,
Yeah.
but one of the guys who like spearheaded the
Mm-hmm.
initial rebellion against the elves.
Right.
So like that's why when they finally find sanctuary with the elves, he's like, they can't know who I am
Mm-hmm.
because the second they hear my name, they're gonna know that I am my father's son, and that's
Right.
gonna ruin it for everyone. His lore is a little bit muddled. I am curious to see how his book is and like where his journey goes. Yeah, but I read him as much earlier. I guess I read him older. I guess I read him as like at least mid-20s at least.
Mm.
In the movie, he is about the same age
Right.
as Eragon. But I don't know why. His story is like his introduction is a little funky to me.
Yeah.
Even rereading it, I was like, I can't really figure out what you're supposed to be here for.
Right. What's
Really,
going
like,
on?
what's your story? Like, okay.
I have this quote in front of me. I was flipping through my notes,
Yeah.
but there's a moment where Saphira is talking to him and Aragon says, "What's the worth of anything we do?" I think this is after his uncle dies. And
Mhm.
Saphira says, "The worth is in the act. Your worth halts when you surrender the will to change and experience life." I thought that was incredible.
He had some really profound moments for
Yeah.
15, and obviously, once it was picked up, it went through edits and whatever, and we don't know
Mhm.
how much was changed and added. But even like the speech that the uncle gives right
Mhm.
before his cousin leaves to get married or to go get a job so he can get married, I guess. Even like the speech that he gives about, hold on. Consider none your superior, whatever their rank or station in life. Treat all fairly, or they will seek revenge. Be careful with your money. Hold fast to your beliefs, and others will listen. Of the affairs of love, my only advice is to be honest. That's your most powerful tool to unlock a heart or gain forgiveness. That is all I have to say. Like, that's just like very, like, that is a perfect, like, sending off speech, but it's also
Yeah.
like, I read that and I was like, a kid wrote this. And I think that maybe, I don't know if that hindered my reread because definitely it
Mhm.
wasn't like when I was younger, I knew that he was very young. He
Right. And
wrote
that's
it,
empowering.
like
Yeah.
very important. But like there were many times rereading it now where I'm like, this is just insane. Like I
Yes.
couldn't have written this. And I like this is crazy to me. And again, like I did go through some like forums and stuff, and I
Mhm.
came across a couple of comments that said I read it when it was like self-published and it's very different and it
Right.
got a lot of help. And it's like, okay, cool, fine. But he still wrote it. Like,
Yeah.
we don't know what parts are from.
Mhm.
Again, it's not that big of a like time jump, I guess. It's not like
Mhm.
he came back 10 years later
Yeah.
and like added to it. So just that like depth from such a young age is really fascinating.
Yeah, and that these ideas I think are very, I mean, that one quote I had is like two sentences. They were very clearly and not just digestible, but just in like well written. Of you, he's able to really boil these ideas down to really simple ideas.
Yeah. I mean, that was like his sending off speech, and it was like
Yeah.
three sentences. And it's like, wow,
Hmm.
that was like, that didn't feel like curt or like,
Hmm.
that felt heartfelt. It did feel like a father sending his son off to
Yeah.
go start his new life, but without being like preachy or rambly or like a little overly flowery. I do think that he does a really good job. Like, there are some like pretty basic fantasy themes. Like,
Hmm.
it does kind of hit all of the basic tropes and story plot lines,
Hmm.
but he does it in a way that even I think like Tolkien wrote The Hobbit for his kids.
I don't
It's
think I
like
knew
a
that.
kid's book, but it
Hmm.
doesn't read like a kid's book,
No.
in my opinion. So like, even if you are like writing for an audience, just doesn't necessarily mean that
Hmm.
you can like speak directly to them. And I wonder how much of it is like coming from him writing from such a young age, where
Yeah.
he is able to grapple with these ideas in his own mind and then present them almost to his peers
Yeah.
through this book. Where I think like an older writer might not be able to do, because they,
Yeah.
you get too caught up in like, oh, is the prose good, or is this unique enough, or is this, like, is this
Will
gonna
it
stand
sell?
out?
And
Do I have enough pages about the trees?
yeah, it is sort of special that it could be created in that, not a vacuum, but kind
Yeah,
of.
but kind
Yeah.
of, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it hits all the tropes, and like you said, like, I read a lot of fantasy, and an issue with like a lot of newer fantasy is that it hits all of the same points and it
Hmm.
doesn't say anything new. Whereas when this one, I was reading it, I was like, oh, am I gonna like feel this the same way?
Hmm.
Because I do know that it hits all of the same classic fantasy points, but I didn't feel like it is a little slow to get through, and I think that's like a pacing issue, but it didn't feel like repetitive. It didn't feel like it was tropey. Like, it didn't
Hmm.
feel like it was like trying to force all of the marks of a classic
Right.
fantasy novel, which is just, again, fascinating. Like, the way that
Hmm.
he, like, whether it was intentional or not, of him to like walk this very thin line is interesting.
Yeah. I think I was also interested in how much, especially in the later portions of the book, Eragon is deciding sort of who he will side with in this upcoming political upheaval. And he definitely, there is this, we've talked on touched on it, of like, no one is in the unique position that he is in. So even if he chooses a side, he will be giving something up, and he will still be isolated within that side. But there's a section pretty early on with Brahm, who is his this sort of wizard mentor figure who is hanging around Eragon's village and helps him in the early portions. But Brahm says it can be a terrible knowledge to know who you are without any delusions or sympathy is a moment of revelation that no one experiences unscathed. A little bit lower. Only the resolute find their identity, but I cannot help you with this. It is a search that you will have to undertake on your own. I was really struck by that.
Yeah. Well, I think that his mentors, they're not necessarily like pulling him in opposite directions.
Mm-hmm.
But they're reinforcing, like, hey, follow your heart. Like, even his uncle in his speech, he said,
Yeah,
hold fast to your beliefs and others will listen. That is
but
all I.
it's so hard to be 15 and not know your beliefs.
Yeah. But it's, while everyone else has their own reasons for siding with who they're siding with and their own values that they've gained through more years of like experience or their traumas or whatever, he really does have like a unique opportunity to
Yeah.
learn from them, but it doesn't feel like he's necessarily being manipulated by them
Yeah.
or taken advantage. Like, everyone is actually giving him a lot of grace.
Yeah.
Which is impressive. Maybe slightly unrealistic, but
Yeah. I see again, are you willing to die for what you believe in? The real courage is in living and suffering for what you believe. Just good nuggets. And I'm also just now realizing he starts writing this when he's 15 and Eragon is 15.
Yeah.
I mean, also, isn't that sort of like any time, most of the time when I sit down, it's like, okay, this character is 27 and wears
Yeah.
glasses. And
Right. And it's like, I'm sure he was told, write what you
Mhm.
know. And I think that he, if his parents were publishers and he was homeschooled, I'm sure he had a very
Mhm.
similar where it's like he kind of probably got to just like deep dive into the topics that he wanted to, which clearly was fantasy. I think I was reading, I have like his bio pulled up. Oh, yeah, I completely forgot I was going to bring this up.
Yeah.
So this is a bio from the New York Writers Institute on him.
Okay.
He grew up also in Montana.
Hmm.
I also grew up in Montana
I was
homeschool.
gonna ask.
Very like
I thought you might have.
it's crazy to me.
And I know he says he was really influenced by that landscape. Was it
Yeah,
like,
and you
yeah,
can really feel it. Like it
yeah.
feels like he has the valleys and the mountains, and you can really feel the depth and how vast everything is. And like you were saying before, like he has like such a vast like geography that they
Mhm.
explore. And when I read that, I was like, I completely forgot that. That makes so much sense. But also, she says, Christopher's love for the magic of stories led him to craft a novel that he would enjoy reading. The project
Mhm.
began as a hobby, a personal challenge. He never intended it to be published. Before he began writing Eragon, he plotted out the entire adventure. He found that doing some of the same things as his characters allowed him to better understand their world, as well as to think of descriptions that otherwise would not have occurred to him. To this end, he forged his own knives and swords,
Oh my God.
made chainmail, spun wool, camped in the Beartooth Mountains, made his own bow, built survival shelters, learned to track game, fletched arrows, felled trees, hiked, and camped. In short, the books embody a great deal of his experience living in Montana.
Oh my God. And I hate to say it, that's some homeschool shit right there. Making your own
Right?
chainmail. Oh
Right?
my
It is.
goodness.
And it doesn't say it in this one, but another one that I had found said that he started like this part of the process,
Mhm.
like daydreaming and like researching when he was 13.
Of
I don't know
course.
how good it is because it's not in this interview with him.
Mhm.
But like, so that's like 2 years of daydreaming, learning how, which all of those things take a lot of time. So it
Yeah.
makes sense. Like learning how to make chainmail. Like, and also, if you've ever tried to make chainmail, the concentration and like how tedious and freaking annoying it is to
You've
just,
tried to make chainmail?
yes.
Don't say it like you're
I was
ashamed.
homeschooled in Montana. I'm a Montana girly. Like this is like
The universal homeschooled in Montana experience.
apparently. I mean, it's crazy to think that like this started not even at like 15, but
Yeah.
at 13 with such depth of like I mean, I think most writers, if they were like an adult writing this, would be like, okay, I want it to feel like Montana. So let me go and like maybe learn how to hunt. Let me go
Mhm.
explore the countryside in Montana. Maybe go camping and like
Yeah.
live in the wilderness.
Yeah. I think like rent an Airbnb. Like that's what occurred to me.
But it's just like the dedication that this
Yeah.
kid had at 13 is insane. And I think that I don't know how much of that is like just like keeping my love alive and like idolizing this. But I mean, I do think that it holds up. But I thought that that was really interesting. And I wanted
Yeah.
to bring that up because I was like, wow.
I'm glad you did. When I did my episode on Fable Haven, my guest, Xana, is from Utah. It's by a Utah author. It's Mormon. It was very apparently like
Yeah.
pushed into like he came to all the schools. And I saw something where, oh, I hope I wrote this down, where to promote the book, so I wanted to ask basically like if you were an early adopter because you were in Montana. But first, to promote the book, Paolini toured over 135 schools and libraries, discussing reading and writing, all while dressed in a, quote, medieval costume of red shirt, billowy black pants, lace-up boots, and a jaunty black cap. He drew the cover art for the first edition of Eragon, which featured Saphira's eye, along with the maps on the inside covers of his book.
I didn't know that. I knew that he toured. I didn't know that he toured in costume.
With a jaunty black cap.
It's funny because like the more that we're talking, I know that I said in the beginning that I was like, I don't know where the book came from. I just remember seeing the cover.
Yes.
But like I said, my dad was a teacher. And so I'm like, it definitely feels like something that he would have seen. And now hearing that story, because I know that he toured, he never would have come to our tiny town. We had 3,000 people in our town. Like, it wouldn't have been a stop on the map.
Right.
But it definitely could have been something where my dad like heard or like knew that this was happening like throughout the state or heard of it and saw that it was a young writer as well.
Yeah.
Grabbed it for me. I could definitely see that that might have happened. I'm gonna have to ask about that.
Oh, and I love that. I love when dads are like,
costume. That is adorable.
When Taylor Swift's first album came out, my dad really wanted me to listen to it because he's like, she writes her own songs and you're a writer.
My dad did the same. He got me Taylor Swift like the first album. He did the same, and I was like, I don't like country music, but this is cool things.
Yeah, it's a nice idea.
Cool. It is cool. So now I'm like, oh wow, that is actually probably how it happened, especially if he was like going through schools. That's crazy. That is so adorable.
I know, because he's got to be like 20.
Yeah, the fact that these places like also took him seriously, you know, like the grace that all of these adults, quote unquote, gave to this essentially child in so many steps along the way is insane. Like I said, he would have been 23 when the movie came out, which means he probably would have been 21 at most when they signed the deal for his book to become a movie, like a big, I think it was intended to be like big blockbuster movie at the time, but it just kind of flopped. But
for sure, it's Harry Potter follow-up.
It was supposed to be like one of the second comings of Harry Potter, essentially. It's like they were just trying to like put all of their money behind anything that could recreate the success of Harry Potter, which eventually they found in the Hunger Games and in Twilight. But in between that, there were and even after, like surrounding that, there were a lot of attempts. And I'm surprised that it wasn't more successful.
Definitely like remember it having a presence, like, and I remember I think that was
really successful.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's so surprising to me that like it was, and I guess is considered such a flop. But again, like going back to our Princess Bride episode, that was a complete flop. It took 20 years.
Yeah, that was VHS.
Coming out in VHS for it to become, and now it's not even considered like, it's still considered just like a cult classic, which is insane to me. I do think that the Princess Bride movie is leagues above the Eragon movie.
Yeah, it's hard to beat that movie.
But it is fascinating that the book saw so much success and that the movie seems like it was hated on pretty viciously, because there were definitely much worse movies.
Oh my gosh.
At the time.
Oh my gosh. In 2006? Oh my gosh. But I also wonder if there was just this sort of move in the publishing world, because to my knowledge, like Harry Potter in terms of children's literature was unprecedented in terms of the popularity. So I wonder if there was this moment of just like, let's take it and let's go crazy and let's try. And that feels so alien.
Yeah. There are definitely like, you can, if you look back and even like if you kind of like stick your ear to the ground now, like you can see shifts in publishing where people are just like, and in film too as well, but like more attuned to like the publishing. It's like, oh, they're just kind of throwing everything at the wall and they're just gonna see what sticks. Like so it'll be interesting to see like in 2-3 years what comes out and sticks around from this year, you know, and moving on from that. But this one did work out as far as book publishing, at least not in the film. I mean, he's still writing them, which is insane.
He's still writing them. What kind of new perspectives do you think this reread brought to your understanding of this book? What surprised you?
I think I was like really consumed during this read with the like facts of the publishing, like and of his age. And I think like that really consumed me while I was reading this. So it definitely like it took me out of it a little bit. And I don't want to say like in a bad way, but it was definitely like I was like, wow, this is like he wrote this when he was this age. And like so this is like the story that he came up with and all of these different points. I'm like, wow. So that was probably the biggest thing that I got out of it this time. But yeah, I think just all of the points that we have touched on already, it's like, wow, this is such a classic, iconic fantasy dragon story, right? It's essentially kind of following the Lord of the Rings,
Yes.
you know, beat for beat, but he does it in a way where he doesn't have all of the side, you know, sidekick, or he doesn't have the adults who take over in the end and like make everything better. And he's the chosen one, but it's less of like a promised prince and more of like, no, I chose you for a reason. So I think taking what I took out of it was again like the separation of being able to look back and be like, wow, this is insane that this even came to fruition. And also the way that like I was like, wow, I recognize this trope, I recognize this story beat, I recognize this character arc, but he did it well enough, and again, did it well enough at such a young age that it is unique in its own way.
What are some of your favorite dragons in the literary world?
Saphira has always been a favorite. I love Saphira. That's an interesting question. I've suddenly forgotten every dragon name ever. But Saphira has always been a favorite. I love the dragons in Priory of the Orange Tree.
Love Priory of the Orange Tree.
I love their mythology and their history. And I love the direction that Shannon takes with that story because it is like a trope that we, especially now in these recent years, see very often, which is like Dragon Rider Military Academy.
Yes.
But she does it to such a level of depth where it seems like she really treats the mythology with a lot of grace and like respect. I love those dragons so much. And they're not necessarily like the typical dragons that you see. And I am unfortunately a sucker for Game of Thrones.
It's popular for a reason.
There's a reason it's popular. Yeah, I mean, I'll read or watch anything with dragons. It's not necessarily doesn't mean it's always good, but I'll always take it. I'll always try at the very least.
I love as a species.
Yeah.
That it's something we're fascinated by and enchanted by and keep coming back to.
Yeah.
Ashley Westover did our Dragonology episode, and she has a PowerPoint that she'll break out if you barely ask about how dragons were real and going through cultural.
Is this in the episode?
The PowerPoint is not, but I'll email her and I'll get her to send it to you.
I would like a copy for research purposes.
I'll do it.
I love it.
Would you consider it required reading?
I would consider this required reading for anyone who is even remotely interested in fantasy. I do think that if you're not like a fantasy person, maybe not. But if you might be interested in fantasy, I do think it's also a really good introduction.
Yeah, good starting point.
So for me, it's required reading.
Nice. Yeah, I like it a lot. I don't think it's required for me. I am not the fantasy buff that you are. So I think like maybe it's also something I've come to later on. You know, I didn't watch Lord of the Rings until I was 20 something, and I love those, and I'm always watching them.
I think like especially for a child, like someone who's like growing up, I think if anything that they want to read, obviously I'm just like get a book into or anything. But I have recommended this book. Like I have given copies of Eragon to many of my friends with children. And I'm like, this is like, because for most people, they're like, okay, well, I'll give you Harry Potter. And then I don't really know what else to give you. So, but Eragon is like the one where I'm always like, and then I do have a list. Eragon is the one where I'm like, especially because even though people don't like the movie, it does have that very easy access.
Yes.
You can have like a gratification of reading the book and then watching the movie, which I think is important for a child, at least in this day and age.
Yeah. And I know that definitely, I had the reverse with Harry Potter. I was not interested in the book until I saw the movie. And that, well, and I also think that's just like me as a TV writer and a screenwriter. That's the format that my brain works best for.
Will you watch a movie and then you're like, okay, I'll read the book? Or
It just depends. I mean, Eileen by Otis Moshfegh is one of my favorite books, and I saw that movie first.
okay.
And you read like Lapvona, right? And weren't crazy about it?
Yeah, I wanted to love Lapvona. Like
Hmm.
every mosh peg that I pick up, I'm like, this seems like it should hit every
Yeah.
single mark that I want it to hit. And it doesn't for me.
Yeah.
And I can't really pinpoint. I tried really hard to read Lapvona because I was like, this is probably like the closest
Yeah.
of what like for my vibe. I got like halfway through and I was like, I feel like she's just beating the same horse over
Yeah,
and
it's dark.
over
It's
again. And I'm
yeah.
like, I don't mind how dark it is or how gruesome it is, but I'm just kind of like, you got your point across in the
Yeah.
first like, 40 pages and we're still just going in
Mm.
circles. I tried to read, what's the one?
My Year of Rest
Yeah,
and
I tried to read
Relaxation.
that one. That's just not my vibe. I
I
don't know
think it's my
where to
least
pick it up,
favorite. Yeah.
but I haven't tried to read Eileen yet, and I have been recommended it multiple times, but I can't watch things, at least like now, like when I was younger, I definitely could, but I can't watch things and then go read the book. So I want to watch Eileen, but
Hmm.
if I do that, I know I will never read the book. So I have to at least
Mm.
try to read the book first, or else I literally like my brain is like, I already know what's happening, or
Yeah.
it will like put faces on to people, like the actors.
Hmm.
It gets muddled with descriptions or something. And so I literally am just like, I can't bring myself to care about this. Like, why am I doing this?
Wow.
So like whenever there's like a movie or a show coming out and my boyfriend's like, hey, this is like based on a book. Have you read it? And I'm like, nope, but now I'm going to because we
Right before
watched
we
the
see.
show. And so now I have to read the book or I'll never read the book. So I haven't watched Eileen yet because
Hmm.
I need to read the book.
I really recommend the book, and I think I've read all of her novels. I read like half of her short story collection, and I'm just
Mhm.
not really a short story person.
Yeah, I'm not either.
Um, but Eileen is easily my favorite of all of hers. I think Lapvona might be my like third favorite. Her first novel is very very short. It's called McGlue, and I think that's my second
Heard of
favorite.
that one. I've never even
Yeah,
heard of that. That's crazy. That's so
yeah.
well, I did pick up a copy of Eileen like a month or
Mhm.
two ago. So hopefully I will read it. Now I have
Yeah.
like a personal reference. So
There's
I will try
also
for you.
Thank you. There's a like a almost like record scratch moment in Eileen halfway through where
Mhm.
you're like, oh my God,
Okay.
whoa. And I think I obviously I saw the movie first, so I think I just kept waiting for a moment like that in each of her books subsequently. And
Mm,
McGlue like has a mystery you're trying to kind of a lot of her novels do, but has a mystery you're trying to unravel. And I think Eileen is just like so good that the rest are
yeah.
kind of disappointments.
Fair. That's fair. Yeah. I mean, I've tried because she's got Lavona, Eileen, Rest and Relaxation, and I
Mhm.
guess the glue. And is that it?
No, there's also Death in Her Hands, which
Oh
is
yeah.
about which I enjoyed, but it doesn't have like an answer. And Eileen has like an answer, and McGlue has an
Yeah.
answer,
I'm just
and yeah.
okay. Okay. Well, I've tried some of them. I'll keep
Mhm.
going. I will give
Yeah.
them all a shot. Probably not the short stories, but I'll give them all a shot.
Yeah. Yeah, the short stories just didn't work for me. But it's also like it's not my jam really, so.
Short stories are also really hard to do well. And
Mhm.
I have issues with like short story like collections because I'm like, I'll
Mhm.
find one that I really like, and then the rest of them I'm like kind of ruins the vibe of the one that I did like.
Although
So
I think like Shirley Jackson is one of my favorite novelists of all time, so I think like one of hers I'll trust.
yeah, fair. That's fair. Yeah.
She's incredible. So, is there anything you would like to plug as we round out?
You can find me on socials. I'm at That Bookish Witch, and I have recently opened, actually, at the time of recording, in 2 days, is
Oh,
launching. You're the first
oh,
to know, probably. A marketing agency specifically for authors
oh my
and
goodness!
authors of young authors.
Congratulations!
So
That's
thank you.
huge.
That's That Bookish Coven. And we're going to be serving trad and indie authors. And by the time this episode is up, it should be open. So
That's incredible. Oh my
thank
goodness.
you.
Well, thank you so much. I'll stop the recording.
Okay.